would like to present, another story about the Truso as a site himself. Two very important remarks. I would like you to take into the journey itself to the Truso, and I hope that will be help to understand the role of Truso, not only as the site close to the Baltic seashore, but to the another things. The second thing, that those presentation is only or just a hypothesis. I will put your attention to the facts which are very well known, but as far as I know, they were never joined in one common story. But what is very important, those story is only or just hypothetical. At first, I would like to start with another problems which were mentioned today, interactions between history and archaeology. Now you can see the map of the early Polish statehood. The darker one is the state of the first historical ruler, Mieszko I, and the wider borders from the beginning of 11th century, the state of his son, Bolesław the Brave, that means Bolesław Chrobry. During many decades in Polish historiography, which was supported by the archaeological conceptions, there was such a point of view that at first, according to the autochtonistic theory of Józef Kostrzewski, we Slavonic people were here in the borders and the lands of nowadays Poland since the beginning, no later than the late Bronze Age. And such a point of view supported the hypothesis about the long, very evolutionary process of consolidation of the West Slavonic tribes, and then finally creating the state. It was rather, in my opinion, bucolic picture that representatives of different Slavonic tribes came to the early Piast and say, hey boys, let's create the state, it will be very fun. But it was not so easy. We know about something about the ancestors of the Mieszko I. He was born probably in the third decade of the 10th century. We know that the eponym of the dynasty, Piast, was the wheelmaker, Wojciech, and then we know the names of his sons, grandsons, and so on, Siemowit, Lestek, and Siemons. But talking about the relations between archaeology and history, we should point it out to the quite new conception about the Slavonic tribes as a whole. The autochthonic conception of Professor Kazimierz Godłowski, according to this theory, Slavs as an ethnicity became in the middle, in the drainage basin of the middle Dnieper River, and became to the Polish land not earlier than in the beginning of the 6th century AD or later. That means, how to say, revolutionary new point of view, because the ancestors of the Slavonic tribe, the ancestors of the creators of the Polish state, have got not the period of 1000 or even longer time for creating the state, but no less than 300 years. That's quite different. Another step from the archaeology, there are dendrochronological investigations headed by the late Professor Zofia Kurnatowska and Michał Kara from the Poznań. And the general view of this investigation was like this, that those blue points, they are strongholds from the so-called pre-statehood phase, and we know that many of them were destroyed during the last decades of the 10th century and beginning of the 10th century. And it was not the bucolic evolution, and rather bloody internal conquest. There were wars which were taken during several decades by ancestors of Mieszko I. The next question arises. We know that war is a very difficult business. Of course, for every winner, there are profits. There are new lands, new people, slaves, new treasures, and so on and so on. But we also should remember that every war, there are expenses for the winner chiefs, because they need the, let's call it, money. For example, for weaponry, in those times, iron equipment, swords, axes, helmets, spearheads, and so on and so on. They need the money for logistic needs, money for soldiers' pay, nevertheless for local warriors or the sellswords, and so on and so on and so on. And the question is, what was the source of the wealthy of the so prehistorical representatives of the Piast dynasty? From which source they've got the money for several decades of wars. If you are talking about the money in the Viking Age, come on, you are talking about the silver, coins, hack silver, and so on, because they are more visible in archaeological data. But we should remember about another kind of money, let's call this, during the Viking Age. I don't like to list every of them, just some very important in my opinion. So, people, that's slaves, price of animals, mostly cattle, furs, woks, textiles, iron, and I will come back to this last and in several minutes. Okay, now let's go to the place, port of trade of the fringe of the Elblang, according to the descriptions of Wulfstan. I will not mention the fascinating discoveries made by Maciek Jagodziński. We know all of them very, very much. But I would like to put your attention to another problem. Some photos which are very good known, the list of port of trades on the Baltic region, and the primary point of Wulfstan's voyage, namely Haithabu, Hedeby, and reconstruction of the route of Wulfstan. But for us will be interesting not the excavations, the results of many years of diggings, but, well, Truso, in my opinion, it was the marked trait of those places, salt. I will explain it a little bit later. Some reconstruction and hypotheses where Truso was situated with those points discovered by Maciek Jagodziński, the location of the site and the plan of the site too. And there are many hypotheses which are connected with the name of Truso. Some of them is connected with the water of Drużno Lake, some of the water plants, and so on and so on. For example, for me, the most, how to say, reasonable is this which connect the name Truso with salt. There were some scholars who mentioned also those hypotheses, including Gerard Labuda, Jerzy Łąkiewicz-Kozaren, Marek Jagodziński himself too. In those hypotheses, Truso came from the Old Prussian and still nowadays Lithuanian word druza, that means salt water, salt spring, or salt production. But the problem is that both from the historical and the geological point of view, we have no evidences of salt production in Truso or nearby Truso. There is no salt water and so on and so on. So the only answer for this question about the salt name of Truso is that it was not the place of salt production, but a place of trade of salt. It was the fair of salt. And if we have salty name of the place, we should also understand that salt must be delivered here from somewhere else, and the amount of those salt and the period of these activities should be so much that gave the place the salty name. And I think it is interesting to underline that the name is Baltic, Balts, not Scandinavian one. It's another point to the discussion about Truso, Prussian name of trademark of Truso. And salt from one side and from another, what was for. It was my suggestion to iron bars, semi-product for sweat production. I will come to this a little bit later. Okay, and there is the time for another kind of money, very important in the Viking Age, in the Middle Ages as a whole. Salt, nowadays for us, is a spice, just to improve the taste of our food. But we should remember that during the times we are talking about, salt was a main ingredient for preservation of food. For example, salted fishes, pickled meat, soured vegetables. In the time of the painful lack of food in very long period, salt was very important as an ingredient, but it was also treated like money. In 20s of the last century, one of the Polish historian, Wojciech Wróblewski, wrote a paper when he listed almost 30 wars or very important military conflicts, which the background of them were salt themselves. We can also add that in many circumstances, those who held the land with salt had the big power, and they were very wealthy men. From which salt should be delivered to Truso. Here is the location of Truso. From this region. It's very simple answer. Kujawy region, which is historical region of Poland. The area is still one of the richest deposits of the salt all over the Europe, not only in Poland. And it was the region famous because of the salt in the Roman period, and the last discoveries from the 2 years, also probably in the migration period. We have no time to discuss all geological circumstances about the salt in Kujawy region. I can also mention that we have got a specific situation to salt concentration in many cases on the surface, on the ground. A loaf of salt, head of salt if you prefer, in Polish name Truso. That is very important. Salt and what? In my opinion, salt and iron. A barter exchange, good for good. Why I am thinking about this? Because from one side, Kujawy and Polish state have got salt, but suffered because of the high quality iron. Opposite, Scandinavia has a high quality iron and suffered because of the lack of salt. And we can also add that several centuries later, after collapsing the Truso, we have got an evidence in the written sources during the reign of one of the Polish dukes, Leszek Biały, Leszek the White. We knew that he was tried to organize somewhere in the border between border zone between Slavonic and Prussian lands form salis et ferri, that means port of trade, salt and iron. What is very interesting, Leszek Biały was among other Duke of Kujawy region. And at the end we'd like to come back to this matter. In my opinion, salt was very important, not only one, elements of the economical success of the Piast policy. Route to the north along Vistula River, it's quite naturally, and the route with salt and with iron in the area between two rivers, Drvenca and Lower Vistula, almost along those border of the state from the 11th century. The main components of this exchange were, of course, Slavonic people and Scandinavian Vikings. But we should still remember about the third part of those economical system, namely the old Prussians. Without them, without the acceptance by them, those system, it was rather impossible. And just for the end, and you can treat it like a part of the story or like a different kind of joke, I can say. We have not the list of the prehistorical or non-historical fabulous ancestors of Mieszko I. But of course, we know no names of their opponents, without one exception. In the primary Polish chronicle written by so-called Gallus Anonymus in the beginning of the 12th century, we are able to read about the opponent of Piast dynasty, probably the Siemowit. The Latin name is Pompilius, in Polish version Popiel. A very popular person in Polish medieval historiography. But Gall Anonym mentioned only the name of those persons. Several centuries later, in the 14th century, in one of the Polish written sources, so-called Kronika Wielkopolska, a Great Poland Chronicle, we knew something more about Popiel. In this legendary form, he was the Duke of Kruszwica, and Kruszwica is the head of Kujawy region. He was, of course, a bad person, a black character, and he finished his life in a tragic way. Namely, he was eaten by mouses. Until now, in Kruszwica, you can admire Gothic tower, which is called Tower of Mouses. Many interpretations about why he was eaten by mouses. I would like to put your attention just to the end of those presentations that salt loaves, krusza solne, in original they were not, and they are not white like contemporary salt. They were yellowish or grey white, just like mouses. Thank you very much.